To begin this module, we start with the question, why are structuring decisions so important? Why can't we just decide? We know that going through a decision-making process can significantly improve your chances of reaching a decision that works best for your immediate and long-term objectives. But why is this? Oftentimes, we rely on our gut instincts to make a decision. It's very common to hear someone say, my gut is telling me to do this. And while our guts do sometimes know ourselves very well, the problem with relying solely on our guts to make decisions is that our guts are very similar to a black box. All we can see is the output of our gut feelings, but we can't go inside and examine with any fidelity how our guts arrived at a decision. So did our guts account for our cognitive biases? Did our guts take some time to think probabilistically? Did we glean lessons from past decisions or past mistakes? It's hard to know because all our gut gives us is an output in the form of a feeling. But structuring a decision can bring all of these questions out into the open. Additionally, decisions can be complex. Sometimes there's not an immediate, clear, or best option. A decision-making process can provide a way to refine one's thinking about what the decision is really about, clarify what the decision maker really values, and identify differences between options that may not have been discernible at first thought. Structuring decisions can be especially beneficial when making group decisions. When a group of people can agree on a decision-making process before making a decision, they are much more likely to buy into the decision, even if they might have preferred a different option. Group decisions can be tricky, especially when there are competing or conflicting values within the group. And while a decision-making process can't necessarily resolve those differences in all instances, what it can do is provide transparency, make space for all voices to be heard, and allow for an agreed-upon framework to guide the conversation. Now, as many of you surely know, good decision processes don't always result in good outcomes. And so there's always the chance that things outside of our control will impact how a decision turns out. But with a decision-making process, even when you get unlucky and face a less desirable outcome, there's comfort in knowing that you did everything you could on your end to consider the variables that you could control, and there's greater ease in teasing out whether this undesirable outcome was due to chance events, or instead if there were flaws in the decision-making process. It is important to note that not all decisions require or allow for a decision-making process. Some decisions may not have a major impact on the decision maker's health, lifestyle, self-concept, or reputation. So decisions like these might include what to order for dinner, or which book to read next, what clothes to wear to school or work, or whether or not to speak up in a meeting or class. For other decisions, the impact may be potentially meaningful, but either short-lived or require quick in-the-moment decisions. So for example, whether or not to run a yellow light. So in these cases, a deliberative decision-making process is unnecessary and untenable. There's just not time, or it's just not necessary. Other decisions may have a greater impact on the decision maker's life and well-being, and or the impact may be longer lasting. So for example, deciding which after-school job to take, or picking an extracurricular activity, choosing a college or a major or post-high school plan, or figuring out whether to end a relationship. So in cases where the impact is great or the duration of the impact is lengthy, structuring decisions can be very, very helpful. As I mentioned briefly a moment ago, sometimes there are important decisions that will impact our lives or the lives of our students that there is just not time to deliberate over, like whether to get a ride home with a friend who's been drinking, or deciding how to react to a bully in the moment, or making healthy decisions about social media usage. In these cases, rather than going through a decision-making process, we can learn good decision skills for habit forming and in-the-moment decisions. So to summarize, for decisions that we have to make in the moment, or for decisions that won't have a large impact on our lives, a structured decision-making process is generally not necessary or possible. But for decisions that have a large impact and for which there's time to deliberate, a decision-making process can be very valuable. When we think about structuring the process for the types of big decisions we discussed previously, there are some key steps we want to make sure to include. It's important to remember that while there are many different acronyms and approaches that you may come across for structuring a decision process, most include some combinations of the steps you'll see here. So step 1 is framing. This step is when you define what you are and are not making a decision about and what the scope of the decision is. Clarifying values. In this step, you clarify what matters to you and what you really want out of a decision. Generating options. This is your opportunity to be creative and generate a wide range of options before you narrow your thinking down. Step 4 is gathering information. In this step, you do some research and learn more about each option so you can begin to effectively evaluate each one. Predicting outcomes. In this step, you think about possible outcomes in terms of likelihoods, expected values, and risks. The next step is explaining. This is about sharing your thinking about the decision and articulating your reasons and rationales for your choice. Taking action involves behaving in ways that are consistent with your goals and decisions. And finally, reflecting. In this step, you evaluate and learn from the quality of your decision-making process. And although we are presenting these steps in a somewhat linear way on this visual here, it's important to note that when making a decision, these steps are not necessarily one and done. So starting at or revisiting different steps might be warranted based on the situation and what decision needs to be made. So for example, sometimes as you're gathering information, new information may lead you back to more options, and vice versa. In the following video, you'll learn a bit more about these key steps and how decision makers can utilize them to make the best decisions for themselves.
Every day, you make hundreds of decisions. Most are easy. The choice appears simple or even automatic. But other decisions require much more attention. The decision might impact your health, wealth, or general sense of happiness. It may impact friends, family, or even society as a whole. When you run into serious decisions, like whether to purchase a car or take that new job in a different town, having a plan in place to handle them can help you feel more in control of the life you're living. The process for making decisions is one of the critical skills included in decision education. Think about the process of making a decision as if it's the process for painting a picture. The first thing you need to do is figure out which decision you want to focus on. Is it work, wealth, or something else? Understanding your focus allows you to select the right size of canvas for your painting. This way, you'll know the frame you have to work within. Framing is a critical part of making a decision. When you acknowledge the parameters or boundaries of the decision at hand, you can truly understand what you are and are not making a decision about. You won't waste time thinking about factors you have no control over, or work to solve a problem that's not the one you want to address right now. Once you have your frame in place, think clearly about or clarify your values. What's really important to you? Be honest with yourself. Make this about who you are, not about who you want to appear to be. This enables you to focus on changing your situation and the world around you by putting at the forefront things that matter most to you. You can think about your values as colors on a palette. The colors can be combined to create any image you imagine, but you'll want to be using the values that really resonate. Don't rush this. Really think about what's important to you. The answers may surprise you. Remember, your opinion is the one that matters here. You are the world's foremost authority on your own values. And your values have an impact on both yourself and those you care about most. Now you're making progress. Yet, being realistic with yourself is only the beginning. Oftentimes, one value you hold dear may conflict with another value when it comes to a specific decision. You may be forced to make trade-offs. One way to iron out value trade-offs is to generate more and better options for your decision. Take the time to dive deep here Because, as in painting, making a successful decision is often about thinking creatively, pushing past the first, second, or even third thing that comes to mind. Make sure you don't limit yourself with only 2 opposing options. Almost always, a third or fourth option aligns more closely with your values. Now ask yourself, are the options under your control? Significantly different from one another? Attractive? Doable? Each answer needs to be yes. Trade-offs remain a large obstacle for most major decisions. As you consider your options, it may make sense to circle back to your values for a moment. We all have both short and long-term values. Often, the option that offers long-term value is the better choice. To better evaluate each option, gather information from a variety of sources. If you only reference facts from sites you always rely on, or people whose opinions you already agree with, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Good, unbiased information comes from credible sources that are not linked to politics, specific companies, or predefined ideas. These sources are current, and the best ones acknowledge that they don't have all the answers. They present data and allow for differing points of view. After you've collected the information you need, it's time to start predicting the possible outcomes of your options. What are you risking if things don't work out? How much value, in terms like time, health, or happiness, is each outcome likely to deliver? Because predicting the future is difficult. People often skip this critical part of making a decision and fall back on wishful thinking, hoping their favorite option will simply work out. What is the likelihood that your options will work out as you imagine? You need to explore the probability of what's most likely to happen, and keep in mind the possibility that less likely results can occur. Next, make sure you can explain your decision. It's one thing to simply parrot information or arguments, but quite another to process data, organize your thinking, and make it your own. That's quite an achievement. If you can clearly explain the reasoning behind your decision, what you're thinking and why, it demonstrates that you have internalized the entire set of factors necessary to make an informed decision. This also opens the door for additional input. It's important to remain open-minded. You may change your mind after hearing some news, or after listening to the informed opinions of others who understand your values and have your best interest in mind. With the picture taking shape, now is the time for following through with action. Acting on a decision turns something that was theoretical into something that is tangible. It confirms to others and to yourself that your head and heart are resolved together and committed to the goal at hand. Now that your painting is complete, step back and reflect on your thought process. Perhaps you could have framed your decision more precisely. Or maybe you needed to generate an option that fit more of your values. So, refine parts of the process to improve your decision-making in the future. It's important to recall that your aim is to make the best decisions possible for you and those around you, given the information and values you have at a particular moment. There's no guarantee that you'll always get the outcome you wanted, but by taking the time to fine-tune your decision-making process over the long run, you will increase your odds of reshaping your life by making better decisions, which impact us all.
We will now explore specific decision tools that can be used to support a decision-making process. There are many tools that can help the process of making a decision more efficient and increase the likelihood of a preferable outcome. Not all tools are going to be appropriate for all decisions, and for some decisions, it may be beneficial to use different strategies at different steps in a structured decision-making process. Many of these tools and practices can help mitigate or at least minimize errors due to cognitive biases and can support the decision maker in thinking probabilistically. As mentioned before, we will be going over 4 specific decision-making tools. This is not an exhaustive list, but we will introduce you to a variety of tried and true strategies to support your decision making. The 4 decision tools that we will be going over in order are pre-mortems, decision journals, weight and rate method, and decision trees. In addition to providing a structure to guide the thinking of decision makers, these tools can provide a strategy for bringing those gut feelings from the black box we discussed earlier out into the open.
The first decision tool that we will examine is the pre-mortem. Applied psychologist Gary Klein came up with the concept, which was later written about by Daniel Kahneman. And a premortem is a strategy used before a big decision is made. So in this thought exercise, the decision maker or decision makers imagine a decision has been made, a plan has been set and executed, and the outcome was a total disaster. This method provides a structured process for considering all the factors that may have caused this hypothetical failure and allows the decision maker to be proactive about either gathering more information, tweaking their decision, or looking for better options. So in this video about a teacher named Ms. Newman, you will see her reflecting on her process of choosing a roommate and an apartment in her college days. And as you watch, consider how the premortem may have helped her avoid some challenging outcomes.
Welcome to Burnout Blockers number 5. Plan lessons better with premortems. This video will explain how to use the business strategy of conducting a premortem to increase your classroom successes. Back in Ms. Newman's college days, she saw Brianna, one of her acquaintances from class, posting a flyer about needing a roommate for her apartment in the upcoming school year. Ms. Newman was in fact looking for a place, so she said that she'd check it out. Ms. Newman visited the apartment and saw that it was new and bright. She would be sharing a room with Brianna, but it was a lot bigger than a dorm room. And besides, they had a living room. It looked like a good situation. Maybe on bad weather days, I'll have to take the bus up to campus or something, Ms. Newman thought. But what really could go wrong here? So she went ahead with signing the lease. However, as it turned out, Brianna's annoying boyfriend lived in their room most of the time. And he had a tendency to eat their food without chipping in. Brianna and the boyfriend had a later schedule than Miss Newman, so she was always having to ask them to turn down the music or go out to the living room because she wanted to go to sleep. It wasn't long before things started getting tense, and Miss Newman was counting down the many days she had left to live with Brianna. She wished she had actually taken the time to think through the question, what could really go wrong here? So she could have gotten a better picture of what the living situation would actually be like. Doing a simple check-in called a premortem, a strategy taken from the business world, can often prevent big disappointments. To do a premortem, imagine that whatever you're planning to do has already happened and it's gone awry. What went wrong? Take the time to envision the details. Then, work backwards and ask yourself, what would have been the likely causes of these problems? It'll lead you to ask more questions and do more research so you can make tweaks to your plan before you make your final decision. Or you might find that you'd be better off pursuing a totally different option. Premortems can improve our decisions in both our personal lives and professional lives. Business strategy researchers saw a 30% increase in people's ability to identify reasons for future outcomes when they took the time to imagine that an event already occurred. So try it out when you're planning a week's worth of lessons. Imagine how even a perfect on-paper lesson plan turned out to be a dud in real life. For instance, how did it work based on your students' cognitive development or their prior knowledge? What about the setup of your classroom and the social dynamics of the group? It's simple, but it really helps us be more realistic. So here's the recap on premortems. To do a premortem before you make a decision about a situation, imagine you already went through with it and it's ended badly. Think through what would have likely caused the problems and take the opportunity to change direction if necessary. Planning lessons for the week, deciding how to deal with a student's ongoing behavioral issues, or making changes to the curriculum are all good times to do a premortem. Keep in mind that considering how something could go wrong doesn't make you a pessimist. It's how we prepare for various possible futures. Taking the time to conduct premortems will actually make you more relaxed about the future and more likely to encounter fewer unpleasant surprises. For more insight into how envisioning the future can help you make better decisions, check out Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke and also Super Forecasting, The Art and Science of Prediction by Phil Tetlock.
So just to recap, before an initiative is put in place, you imagine a vision of the future. You've already gone through with the idea and it turned out to be a huge failure. Then you work backwards and ask yourself, what would have been the likely cause or causes of this failure, so you can either make changes to the plan before you actually make your final decision about what you'll do, or you can decide if the option is even worth pursuing. Conducting premortems during early discussions of an initiative can help everyone be realistic about the usual or common factors that might limit progress. Now we are going to talk about a decision tool called the weight and rate method. The weight and rate method is one of the most basic tools for decision making and is especially helpful for significant, deliberate decisions. And it's really ideal for both individual or group decisions. You might hear it called a decision table or a decision matrix or a decision worksheet. And whatever it's called, this method provides a structure for decision makers to frame their decision clearly and concisely, reflect on their goals and values, create options, list criteria, and then weight those criteria in ways that align with their values. So in this example here, this is a very busy slide, but we're going to talk through it. We see a weight and rate table that is helping Miss Smith, a teacher, make a decision about her summer plans. So originally she just was thinking of it as a vacation, and should she decide between a road trip to California or an international trip to the Caribbean. But Miss Smith took some time to reflect on her framing of the decision and realized it was really about what's the best way to use her summer vacation time. So when Miss Smith broadened her framing to move from just road trip versus international trip to a more general, what's the best way to use summer vacation, she was able to come up with some other options that she had not originally thought of. So we see here she, in addition to her road trip, thought about taking time to work on house projects, taking a woodworking course, which is something she'd been interested in for a while, accepting a summer job at her favorite bookstore, and of course, the original option she had of an international trip with family or friends. Generating options can be challenging, it requires some creative thinking, and it may take practice. And it can also be impacted by one's framing of the decision, as we saw in this case. So on the left side over here, we see the criteria or the main things that Miss Smith has decided she values for her time this summer. So Miss Smith has decided she really cares about memories with friends or family, rest and rejuvenation from a very challenging school year, affordability, opportunity for professional growth so she continue to hone her craft, and travel. And then next to her criteria, we see the weights she gave each one. So weighting each criteria allows her to hone in on how much she values each criteria relative to the others. So as we can see here, Miss Smith valued rest and rejuvenation higher than the other criteria. And this was much higher than the other criteria. And then this was followed by affordability, which she rated an 8, and memories with friends and family, which she rated a 6. Though she also values opportunities for professional growth and travel, they're of less importance to her. So you can see she rated those just a little bit lower. So for someone else making these decisions, they might have different criteria, or even if they had the same criteria, they might weight them differently. So like with all other decision tools, the weight and rate table is designed to really center the values of the decision makers. It's worth noting that although the weight and rate table is a great tool for bringing our decisions out of the black box of our gut and into a transparent and structured process, there are many ways in which one can still fall into decision traps while using this tool. So for example, in this version of the decision, Miss Smith valued rest and rejuvenation higher than the other criteria. But it's possible that had she made this decision at a different time of year, her weightings would be different. For example, if Miss Smith was making this decision in September for the following summer, she may not have the same feelings of fatigue that she often feels in March, and she might have valued something else higher than rest and rejuvenation. But anchored on her feelings at the moment, it's possible that Miss Smith may not accurately capture what she will value in the summertime. But regardless, this tool is a very helpful jumping off point for thinking intentionally about what we value in a decision and to what magnitude. So now that Miss Smith has her options, she's come up with what she values, and she's weighted them, it's time for her to rate each option against each criteria. Rating is a way to estimate how well a decision option satisfies a particular criteria. So Miss Smith used a simple scale of 1 to 5 in her ratings. So we can see here that her road trip to California rated really high for memories with friends or family, and it rated really high for travel, but not so high for these other criteria of affordability and opportunity for professional growth. So she's rated those a little bit lower with a 1 and a 2. Now to get the score for each criteria, we multiply the weight by the rate. So for memories with friends and family, a road trip to California scored a 30. For affordability, it scored a 16. And she does this for all of the criteria for each option. In road trip to California, this gets her a total score. She adds them all up and gets a total score of 105. So this is the same process Ms. Smith then goes through for each of the other options. So taking time to work on house projects, woodworking course, etc. Now, once she's done all that, we can see her total scores here. And although there is no clear and fast winner for Ms. Smith, it does seem clear that using her summer vacation to work on house projects and taking a woodworking course don't score quite as high in helping her achieve what she values this summer. I do want to add that this method is meant to guide your thinking, but it's not meant to make your decision for you. And also because different biases and errors may be involved in your weightings and ratings, it's really useful to think of this as a guide, but not the be-all end-all for your decision. There are many benefits to using the weight and rate method. It allows the decision maker or decision makers to think intentionally about the criteria. It's up to the decision makers to determine the criteria and how much each should be valued. And this is really meant to be a fluid process. So the decision maker can always go back and add criteria or re-weight them. They can talk with others to get feedback and suggestions, with the end goal being that ultimately the weights align with the values of the decision makers. This method also allows the decision maker to generate and compare options. Sometimes in a decision, we may think we're deciding between two things. I want to take a vacation and it should be either between a trip to California or an international trip. The weight and rate method facilitates a process to think creatively about options you might not have considered had there not been a structure in place for generating more. This method also helps you to compare these options in a normed and consistent manner so you don't end up trying, for example, to make a summer break decision in which you haphazardly compare the affordability of working at a bookstore with the memories of a road trip across the country. This allows you to compare apples to apples more intentionally because you've determined the criteria you care about regardless of the option you're considering. This method also prevents anchoring. In group decision-making, using a table to rate each criteria before talking with others allows a decision maker to identify and name their opinions before being influenced by the opinions of others. It can then serve as the basis for a really productive conversation about an agreed upon set of criteria and can help easily highlight areas of significant differences of opinion or areas where the decision makers agree. And finally, it provides a built-in check on the process. If the scores feel wrong, this might be a sign that the criteria list is incomplete or that certain criteria may be under or overvalued. The ratings are really estimates of satisfaction, so careful use of the weight and rate will also include consideration of the downsides of any option. The final tool we will talk about in this module is a decision tree. A decision tree is a diagram or chart that helps individuals or groups think probabilistically about the possible outcomes of their choices, and it can represent in a methodical way the architecture of a decision. It provides a visual representation of the series of possible options and next steps that decision makers face as they work their way through a decision, and it's particularly useful for highly complex decisions. A decision tree can help guide you to think about and predict the likelihood of different outcomes occurring, which can help you to more clearly see the benefits of one option over another. When a decision involves a lot of uncertainty, a decision tree can be really helpful in bringing the risk profiles of each option to life. It encourages thorough, logical thinking about a problem. In this video from the Decision Education Foundation, you will see an example of what a decision tree can look like in action. In this example, you'll see how a coach uses a decision tree to plan what the best course of action is in a specific, game time, high-stakes decision.
It's the biggest game of the season with the playoffs on the line. Your team is behind by 2 with time running out. Your rivals shoot and miss. You get the rebound and call timeout with 4 seconds left. Time for one last play. Imagine you're in the coach's seat. You can go for a 3-point shot to win or a 2-point shot to go into overtime. What should you do? Coaches need to make high-stakes decisions while facing lots of uncertainty. When things don't turn out right, there's a lot of second-guessing. Making the right call at the right time is one reason some coaches get paid so much. In this video, we'll examine a tool that can help identify the best action when facing uncertainty. It's called a decision tree. You know you're less likely to hit the 3-pointer than the 2-pointer. You want to maximize the odds of winning. So, how can you know you're making the right choice? A decision tree can help you be sure. When you build a decision tree, you start by listing the decisions and uncertainties in the order they will occur. Draw a square to represent the decision, which you'll label what shot. Lines coming from the square are your alternatives, which you'll label either a 3-pointer or a 2-pointer. In either case, you don't know whether you'll make the shot. Draw a circle to represent the uncertainty, and lines coming from the circle represent possible outcomes. Since you can only make or miss the shot, you can label the outcomes on the tree as yes and no. Making a 2-point shot results in another uncertainty. Will you win in overtime? So you add that to the 2-point shot branch of our tree, like this. Next, you'll need to represent the possible outcomes at the endpoint of the various branches. In this case, win or lose. Following that, you'll add probabilities to the tree, starting with the 2-point shot. Let's say a good estimate for a 2-point jumper based on your year's average is 55%. You would put that probability in the yes branch, and that makes the no branch 45%, since they total 100%. Now how about winning in overtime? This might be 50-50, assuming you've been evenly matched this far in the game. For the 3-point shot, let's assume you've averaged 40% for the season. That makes the chance of no for the 3-point shot 60%. That's everything we need to decide what to do. Now, following the 2-point shot path, you're 55% likely to make the shot and 50% likely to win in overtime. To find the probability that will make the 2-point shot and win in overtime, we multiply the two, giving us a 27.5% chance. Since we're equally likely to lose in overtime as win, the chance of losing in overtime is also 27.5%. This is called a joint probability. Now, let's fill in the rest of the tree. There's a 45% chance you'll miss the 2-pointer. For the 3-point shot, you can also extend the outcomes, 40% to make it and 60% to miss it. Now, total up the values for each alternative. The 2-point shot is 27.5% likely to win and 72.5% likely to lose. For the 3-point shot, the win-lose probabilities are 40% and 60%. So even though you're more likely to lose either way, you're better off taking the 3-point shot, as this gives you a much better chance of winning. If you do the math, 40% is 45% better than 27.5%. That's a significant difference. That's why consistently making the better decision is what separates the good from the great. This kind of sound reasoning can give you confidence when facing uncertainty and protect you from decision traps like hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is our natural tendency to look at the outcome of a decision and evaluate the decision based on the outcome. You can make the right choice and lose. Facing a similar situation, you should still make the same decision. You can make the wrong choice and win. This means you got lucky. You shouldn't have done it, and you shouldn't do it again. A good decision doesn't turn bad because the outcome's bad. A bad decision doesn't turn good because it had a good outcome. Avoid the decision trap of looking backwards through hindsight bias. Focus instead on getting to better decisions beforehand. Tools like decision trees and the decision chain help you identify the difference between a good decision and a bad decision in advance. Now that you understand the basics of building a decision tree, you can apply it on your own to identify your best alternatives. This tree was simple, but this approach can be applied to any decision to identify the best alternative, given what you want and what you know.